She texted her heartbreak to the wrong number, but the billionaire's response left her in tears. Hello, beautiful people. Wow, you're the lucky ones who found me first. Welcome to my very first video. I cannot believe this moment is finally here. After months of preparing, dreaming, and honestly being a little nervous, here we are together. I'm Tommy, but you can call me Dr. Tom. I am a retired doctor who just loves writing. If you're someone who enjoys emotional love stories, romantic storytelling, or dramatic short films, narratives that make you cry, smile, and feel inspired, then you're in the right place. I finally want to begin this journey of taking just as many people that will be joining the Dr. Tom's family on a daily dose of love adventures. So, if you're here on this video, then you're lucky to be among my first family, and you have the full rights to make decisions. So tell me, what do you think of the name Dr. Tom's Family? Are you loving it already, or do you have a better suggestion? Let me know in the comments. I'll be reading all of them. And while you're at it, let me know your names and where you're watching from in the comments too, because we'll soon embark on a journey of loss, broken trust, and an unexpected love that will keep you at the edge of your seats. It would just be so amazing to see how far and wide our Dr. Tom's family will reach, because I will be responding to everyone. So, if you enjoyed today's story, please subscribe, like, and share with your friends so they'll not miss out on this love we'll be sharing here. Now get comfortable, and let's begin with a heart drenched in love. The sun was setting over Phoenix, Arizona, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets of the traditional Mexican-American neighborhood, where 3 generations of the Grayson family had built their dreams. The scent of fresh tortillas and roasted chilies still lingered in the evening air, but tonight, that familiar comfort felt like a farewell kiss. Amy Grayson stood behind the counter of Eliza's kitchen, her 26-year-old hands trembling as she held the official bank notice. The paper felt heavier than it should have, weighted with the finality of its message. 48 hours to pay $50,000, or lose everything her family had worked for since 1952. Eliza's kitchen wasn't just a bakery, it was the heartbeat of the neighborhood. For 70 years, this small corner shop had been where quinceañera cakes were born, where wedding cookies were blessed, where grieving families found comfort in warm pan dulce after funerals. The walls held the laughter of children who had grown up sneaking extra frosting, the whispered secrets of teenage girls planning their futures, and the proud tears of parents celebrating graduations with tres leches cake. Amy's fingers traced the faded family photograph hanging beside the cash register. 3 generations of women stood together, flour dusting their aprons, wooden spoons in their hands like royal scepters. Her great-grandmother Isabella, who had started with nothing but a dream and a handful of family recipes. Her grandmother Eliza, who had expanded the business and made it a community cornerstone. And Amy's mother Carmen, who had passed away when Amy was only 12, leaving her to be raised by Eliza's gentle hands and fierce determination. But Eliza was gone now too. 3 months ago, cancer had stolen the last pillar of Amy's world, leaving behind medical bills that had drained every savings account, every emergency fund, every penny Amy had scraped together working double shifts at the bakery while caring for her dying grandmother. The apartment above the shop felt impossibly quiet without Eliza's humming floating down the stairs. Even Coco, Amy's rescue dog, a small brown mutt with mismatched ears that Eliza had insisted they adopt 2 years ago, seemed to understand that their world was crumbling. The little dog sat at Amy's feet, brown eyes reflecting the same uncertainty that kept Amy awake most nights. Amy had tried everything. She had applied for loans at 7 different banks, each rejection feeling like a physical blow. She had reached out to local business associations, community organizations, even crowdfunding platforms. Nothing had worked. The medical debt was too substantial, her credit too damaged, her resources too depleted. This morning had been her final attempt, a meeting with loan officer Robert Martinez at First National Bank. Amy had dressed in her best outfit, carried a folder thick with business plans, profit projections, and testimonials from loyal customers. She had practiced her presentation in the mirror, believing that passion and determination could overcome financial reality. But Mr. Martinez had barely looked at her paperwork. "Miss Grayson, I understand your emotional attachment to this property, but the numbers simply don't work. Your debt-to-income ratio is insurmountable. Even if we approved a loan, which we cannot, you'd be setting yourself up for failure." He had slid her documents back across his polished desk with the same casual indifference he might show when declining a credit card application. "My advice: accept the offer from Gold Corp. They're willing to pay fair market value, which will cover your debts and leave you with enough to start fresh somewhere else." Start fresh somewhere else. The words had echoed in Amy's mind all day. How do you start fresh when your roots run 3 generations deep? How do you walk away from the place where your grandmother taught you that love was the secret ingredient in every recipe? Gold Corp's offer sat on the kitchen counter upstairs, the corporate letterhead looking alien among Eliza's handwritten recipe card. They wanted to tear down Eliza's kitchen, along with the neighboring shops, to build luxury condominiums for wealthy retirees. The irony wasn't lost on Amy. The neighborhood that had nurtured working families for decades would be replaced by homes for people who had never worked a day in their lives within these streets. Standing in her grandmother's kitchen at midnight, Amy held Eliza's wooden spoon, the same one used to stir thousands of batches of churros and tres leches cake. The silence was deafening. Tomorrow strangers would auction off everything that mattered. The tears came suddenly, months of suppressed grief and terror finally breaking free. Amy sank onto the kitchen stool where she had learned to measure flour, where Eliza had taught her that cooking was about more than following recipes. It was about feeding souls, creating memories, building community one meal at a time. "What do I do, Abuela?" Amy whispered to the empty kitchen. "How do I let them tear down everything you built?" The only answer was Coco's soft whimper from the doorway. Amy's phone buzzed with a text from her best friend Lucia. "Coffee tomorrow, need to talk to someone about all this." But Amy couldn't face another conversation about her failure to save the bakery. She couldn't endure another well-meaning friend suggesting she look at this as an opportunity or trust that everything happens for a reason. Some things happen for no reason at all except cruelty and corporate greed. Earlier that week, her grief counselor Dr. Patricia Valdez had suggested something different. "Amy, sometimes talking to someone who doesn't know your history can be liberating. There's an anonymous crisis text line where people share their deepest struggles with trained volunteers. No judgment, no advice unless you want it, just someone who will listen." Dr. Valdez had handed her a card with a phone number. "Just text whenever you need to talk. The person on the other end understands loss too. Sometimes strangers can hold our pain better than the people who love us, because they don't try to fix it, they just witness it." Amy had saved the number in her phone as Hopeline, though she hadn't felt much hope lately. But as she sat in the kitchen surrounded by the ghosts of her family's dreams, she realized she had nothing left to lose. Her fingers moved across the phone screen, muscle memory from years of texting taking over while her conscious mind struggled to find words adequate for this level of devastation. "I don't even know why I'm typing this to a stranger, but I can't tell my friends how scared I am. Tomorrow I lose the last piece of my grandmother. How do you say goodbye to your entire identity? How do you start over when you don't remember who you were before this place defined you?" Amy hit send before she could second-guess herself, then set the phone aside and returned to holding Eliza's wooden spoon. She didn't expect a response. It was nearly 1 in the morning, and whoever monitored the crisis line was probably handling more urgent situations than her business failure. Meanwhile, 1,500 miles away in Denver, Colorado, David Holman sat in his glass-walled penthouse office, surrounded by the glow of multiple computer screens and the distant sparkle of city light. At 32, he was one of the youngest tech billionaires in the country, having built Data Vault Solutions from a college dorm room idea into a $2 billion company that handled cloud storage for Fortune 500 corporations. But tonight, success felt hollow. The acquisition reports spread across his mahogany desk represented millions of dollars in potential deals, yet David found himself staring past them at a framed photograph of his father, Dr. Miguel Holman, who had died from cancer 6 months ago. His father had been a small-town physician who had spent 40 years treating patients who often couldn't afford to pay him. Miguel had measured wealth not in dollars but in lives touched, families healed, communities strengthened. He had died proud of his son's financial success, but worried about the cost of that success, the relationships sacrificed, the simple joys overlooked, the human connections lost in the pursuit of bigger numbers. David's phone buzzed with an unknown number. His first instinct was to ignore it. Random text to his personal line usually meant someone had breached their security protocols. Just last month, his company had dealt with a data breach that had his security team on high alert about any unusual communications. But something made him glance at the message, and the words stopped him cold. "I don't even know why I'm typing this to a stranger, but I can't tell my friends how scared I am. Tomorrow I lose the last piece of my grandmother. How do you say goodbye to your entire identity? How do you start over when you don't remember who you were before this place to find you?" David stared at the message, recognizing the raw pain he'd been hiding behind board meetings and acquisition deals. His assistant had warned him about security risks, but something about those words felt like a lifeline he didn't know he needed. The message read like poetry written in Heartbreak, each question echoing the same doubts that kept David awake most nights. How do you start over? How do you say goodbye to identity? How do you move forward when the foundation of who you are crumbles beneath your feet? David's finger hovered over the delete button, but he couldn't bring himself to erase someone else's pain when it mirrored his own so perfectly. David's response came at 2:30 in the morning, simple but profound. "I'm here if you need someone to listen." Amy stared at her phone screen, surprised by the immediate reply and the gentleness in those 8 words. She had expected either silence or some automated response from a crisis hotline. Instead, she found herself connected to someone who seemed genuinely present in her moment of despair. "Thank you," she typed back. "I didn't expect anyone to be awake at this hour." "Grief doesn't keep regular business hours," came the reply. "Sometimes the hardest moments happen when the rest of the world is sleeping." That exchange marked the beginning of something neither Amy nor David had anticipated, a connection that transcended the boundaries of their intended anonymity and grew into the most honest relationship either had ever experienced. The first week of their conversations felt like two wounded souls circling each other cautiously, sharing enough to feel less alone but careful not to reveal too much. Amy found herself looking forward to the evening messages, often composing her thoughts while she packed up the last remnants of Eliza's kitchen during those final devastating days. "My grandmother used to say that tears are just love, with nowhere to go." Amy texted one evening after spending the day watching strangers appraise her family's legacy. "Tonight I understand what she meant. I have so much love for this place, for her memory, for everything we built together, but there's nowhere to put it anymore." David's response came quickly. "My father told me that success means nothing if you have no one to share it with. I used to think he was being dramatic, but after he died I realized he was warning me about exactly where I'd end up, surrounded by achievements but completely alone." Their conversations became a delicate dance of shared wisdom and inherited pain. Amy would share Eliza's sayings about life, love, and resilience, while David found himself quoting his father's gentle philosophies about purpose and connection. Neither revealed their names, ages, or specific circumstances, but somehow they were sharing the deepest parts of themselves. "Do you think our loved ones can see us struggling?" Amy asked one night, after the final auction had stripped Eliza's kitchen bare. "I hope so," David replied, "because if they can, they know we're carrying their love forward even when we feel lost." By the second week, their conversations had evolved from crisis support to genuine friendship. Amy had packed her few remaining belongings and was preparing to leave Phoenix, though she hadn't told her anonymous friend where she was going. David found himself checking his phone obsessively during board meetings, eager for her messages that brought honesty to his carefully constructed corporate world. "I have to leave the only home I've ever known," Amy wrote one evening. "The debts are too big, the opportunities too small. I feel like I'm betraying everyone who came before me by giving up." "You're not giving up," David responded immediately. "You're regrouping. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is acknowledge when one chapter has ended, so you can begin writing the next one." Amy described her financial struggles without revealing the specific amounts or circumstances, painting her situation in broad strokes of loss and uncertainty. David shared his loneliness despite material success, describing the isolation that came with being surrounded by people who wanted something from him rather than simply wanting to know him. "I'm surrounded by advisors, employees, business partners," David wrote late one night, "but I can't remember the last time someone asked how I was feeling rather than what I was planning to buy next." "I know exactly what you mean," Amy replied. "After my grandmother died, everyone wanted to give me advice about moving on and finding closure, but no one just sat with me in the sadness. Sometimes you don't need solutions, you just need someone to witness your pain." Their late-night conversations became the anchor point of both their days. Amy would save up observations and thoughts throughout her painful waking hours, knowing she could share them with someone who wouldn't try to fix her. David found himself leaving early from networking events and declining social invitations, preferring the genuine connection he'd found with this mysterious stranger to the superficial interactions that filled his professional life. 3 weeks into their digital friendship, both Amy and David reached emotional breaking points that pushed their conversations into deeper, more vulnerable territory. Amy had moved to Denver, driven by a job opportunity at a marketing firm that had offered her a temporary position. But her first week in the new city had been devastating. Her new colleagues were cold and competitive. Her tiny studio apartment felt like a prison, and every morning she woke up feeling like she had betrayed her grandmother's memory by abandoning their shared dream. "I think I'm failing at everything," Amy texted on a particularly difficult Thursday night. "I used to be good at something. I used to matter to people. Now I'm just another corporate drone in a city full of strangers, pretending I know how to build a life from scratch when I can barely remember who I used to be." David's response revealed his own vulnerability. "I'm terrified. I'm becoming exactly like the workaholic father I promised myself I'd never become. He missed my childhood because he was always at the hospital. I'm missing my own life because I'm always in boardroom. The difference is, he was saving lives. I'm just making rich people richer." That night marked a turning point in their relationship. Both admitted these conversations had become the highlight of their days, the one honest connection in lives that felt increasingly artificial and isolated. "I don't know what I would have done these past weeks without you," Amy wrote. "You've become my anchor in a world that feels completely untethered. You've given me something I didn't even realize I was missing," David replied. "Permission to be human instead of just successful." Amy's job at the marketing firm lasted exactly 2 weeks before she was laid off due to budget restructuring, corporate speak for "we hired you to handle a project" that got canceled. With her savings nearly depleted and her confidence shattered, she took the first job she could find, barista at Altitude Coffee in downtown Denver. The work was humbling but oddly therapeutic. After years of running a family business, there was something soothing about the simple rhythms of grinding beans, steaming milk, and creating small moments of pleasure for customers rushing through their busy days. Amy started bringing homemade pastries to work. Comfort baking had always been her way of processing stress, and was surprised when customers began requesting her treats specifically. "Your empanadas are better than my grandmother's," one regular customer told her. "And trust me, that's saying something." Amy smiled, feeling a tiny spark of her old self returning. Family recipes have that effect. They carry love from one generation to the next. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Amy was focused on creating the perfect latte art, a small swan floating in foam, when she heard someone approach the counter. "Rough morning?" The voice was warm, genuinely concerned rather than merely polite. Amy looked up to see a man in an expensive but understated suit, his dark eyes reflecting a kindness that seemed rare in the fast-paced downtown district. Something about his presence felt familiar, though she was certain they'd never met. "Rough year, actually," she replied with a tired smile, handing him his coffee. "But we keep going, right?" "We do," he agreed, their fingers brushing briefly as he took the cup. "Beautiful work, by the way," he gestured to the swan in the foam. "Thank you. Beauty matters, even in small things." David felt an inexplicable pull toward this woman, whose tired smile carried echoes of resilience and loss. He wanted to continue the conversation, to understand why she seemed so familiar. But the line behind him was growing, and she had already turned to the next customer. That evening, Amy's text carried new energy. "Met someone today who had kind eyes. Reminded me that there are still good people in the world. Do you think it's possible to recognize a soul you've never met?" David stared at the message, his heart racing as puzzle pieces began falling into place. Kind eyes, coffee shop, beautiful latte art. The timing, the location, the sense of recognition he'd felt. "I think souls call to each other across any distance," he replied carefully. "Sometimes the person you need most is closer than you think." Over the next several days, David found himself returning to Altitude Coffee, each visit confirming his growing suspicion that the barista with the beautiful smile was his anonymous text companion. Amy's messages perfectly matched their brief conversations, her references to downtown Denver, her comments about difficult customers, her mention of making pastries that reminded people of their grandmothers. David began researching, using the investigative resources available to someone with his connections and wealth. Amy Grayson, 26, formerly of Phoenix, Arizona. Eliza's Kitchen, foreclosed 3 months ago after the death of Eliza Grayson, Amy's grandmother and guardian. Medical debt totaling $47,000. Property purchased by Gold Corp for luxury development. The more David learned, the more his heart broke for the woman who had been sharing her pain with him through their anonymous conversations. Amy had lost everything: her family, her business, her home, her identity, and was now rebuilding her life one coffee cup at a time in a city where she knew no one. David struggled with the ethics of his discovery. Amy didn't know who he was, didn't know that her anonymous confidant was someone with the resources to change her life dramatically. She had been honest with him because she believed he was a stranger with no power over her circumstances. If she knew his true identity, would she still trust him with her vulnerability? But as David researched Eliza's Kitchen, an idea began forming. The building was still owned by Gold Corp, their development plans stalled by neighborhood resistance and permitting delays. David's company had the resources to purchase the property, restore it, and return it to its original purpose. He knew he could give Amy back her dream without her ever knowing he was involved. The plan took shape quickly. Data Vault Solutions would quietly purchase Eliza's Kitchen as part of a cultural heritage preservation initiative. They would restore the bakery to its original condition, upgrade the equipment, and create a management position for someone with experience in traditional Mexican baking. Amy would be contacted by what appeared to be a nonprofit organization seeking to preserve neighborhood businesses. As David finalized the details, he told himself he was simply helping a friend in need. But deep down, he knew the truth was more complicated. He was falling in love with someone who didn't even know his name, and he was about to change her life in ways she could never have asked for. The question that kept him awake at night was whether he was being generous or manipulative, whether he was respecting Amy's independence or undermining it. But every time he read her messages about missing her grandmother's kitchen, about feeling like she had failed her family's legacy, he convinced himself that sometimes love meant taking action, even when that action wouldn't be acknowledged. Would you do same in David's position? Is it manipulation or compassion? Let me know below. Amy was finishing her closing duties at Altitude Coffee, wiping down the espresso machine for the 3rd time to avoid going home to her lonely studio apartment, when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, with a Phoenix area code that made her heart skip unexpectedly. "Hello, is this Amy Grayson?" The woman's voice was professional but warm, with a slight accent that reminded Amy of home. "Yes, this is Amy. My name is Carmen Vasquez, and I'm calling from Heritage Preservation Solution. We're a non-profit organization dedicated to restoring culturally significant businesses in Latino communities. I have what might sound like an unusual proposition for you." Amy's grip tightened on the phone. "I'm sorry, I think you might have the wrong person. I don't own any businesses. Actually, we're calling about Eliza's Kitchen in Phoenix. We understand it was your family's bakery before the recent closure." The words hit Amy like a physical blow. She sank onto the stool behind the counter, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. "How do you know about Eliza's Kitchen?" "We've been researching traditional family businesses that were lost due to economic hardship rather than lack of community support," Carmen explained gently. "Eliza's Kitchen came to our attention through neighborhood advocates who spoke passionately about its cultural importance to the community." Amy's voice barely rose above a whisper. "There has to be a mistake. Nobody knows about my grandmother's bakery. It was just a small neighborhood shop. Miss Grayson, sometimes the most important places are the ones that seem small to the outside world, but mean everything to the people they serve. We have an anonymous benefactor who specifically wants to restore Eliza's Kitchen and return it to the community." Amy felt tears beginning to blur her vision. "I don't understand. What does that mean exactly?" It means full renovation of the original building, restoration of all the original fixtures and equipment, plus modern upgrades to meet current health and safety standards. More importantly, it means offering you the position of head baker with a pathway to ownership stake as the business becomes profitable again. The phone nearly slipped from Amy's trembling hands. This can't be real. Things like this don't happen to people like me. They do when someone believes your story matters, Amy. When someone understands that preserving our cultural heritage means supporting the families who carry those traditions forward. Amy was crying openly now, months of suppressed grief and hope flooding out in uncontrollable sobs. I lost everything. The medical bills, the foreclosure. I couldn't save what my grandmother spent her whole life building. You didn't lose everything, Carmen said softly. You still carry Eliza's recipes, her techniques, her love for the community. Those can't be taken away by banks or corporations. And now you have the chance to honor that legacy in the place where it belongs. 2 weeks later, Amy stood on the familiar sidewalk outside what had been Eliza's kitchen, her hands shaking as she held the keys Carmen had given her. The building looked exactly as she remembered from her childhood. The same warm yellow walls and hand-painted sign that her grandfather had created 40 years ago. But as Amy unlocked the door and stepped inside, she gasped in amazement. Everything was exactly as it had been during Eliza's lifetime, but somehow better. The vintage display cases had been restored to pristine condition, their curved glass sparkling like new. The old mixer that had belonged to Amy's great-grandmother sat in its familiar corner, completely refurbished, but maintaining every dent and scratch that told the story of decades of faithful service. The kitchen was breathtaking. All of Eliza's equipment had been meticulously restored, from the massive commercial oven to the wooden prep tables worn smooth by 3 generations of hands. But modern improvements had been seamlessly integrated. New refrigeration units disguised to match the vintage aesthetic, updated electrical systems, and a point-of-sale system that looked like it belonged in the 1950s but functioned with contemporary efficiency. Amy wandered through the space in wonder, running her fingers along surfaces that held the muscle memory of her childhood. The spot where she had stood on a step-stool to reach the counter. The corner where Eliza had kept her special wooden spoon. The window where her great-grandmother Isabella had displayed her most beautiful cakes to catch the attention of passers-by. On the wall behind the counter, Amy discovered something that made her knees buckle with emotion. Eliza's handwritten recipes had been professionally framed and displayed like the treasures they were. Her grandmother's flowing script, written in both Spanish and English, detailing not just ingredients and measurements but little notes about technique and love. Mix the masa with gentle hands and grateful hearts. Let the dulce de leche simmer slowly. Good things cannot be rushed. Always save the last empanada for someone who needs it more than you do. Beside the recipes, a simple note in elegant calligraphy. Some dreams deserve a second chance. Honor her memory. Amy sank into the chair where Eliza used to sit during quiet afternoons, reading her paperback novels between customers, and cried tears of gratitude that seemed to come from the very center of her soul. Eliza's kitchen reopened 6 weeks later with a block party that drew hundreds of neighbors, former customers, and curious newcomers. Amy had spent those weeks relearning her grandmother's recipes, adjusting techniques for the new equipment, and hiring staff who understood that they weren't just making food, they were creating community. The response exceeded everyone's expectations. Lines formed around the block for Amy's tres leches cake, her grandmother's famous churros and empanadas that carried the exact flavor profiles that longtime customers remembered from their childhoods. But more than individual treats, people came for the atmosphere Amy had recreated, the warmth, the sense of belonging, the feeling that Eliza's kitchen was a place where everyone was family. Amy hired 3 local teenagers, teaching them not just baking techniques but the history behind each recipe, the stories of the women who had perfected these flavors over decades of trial and error. She instituted monthly Abuela Eliza dinners where anyone in the neighborhood could come for a free meal, no questions asked, continuing Eliza's tradition of ensuring no one in the community went hungry. The bakery became what it had always been meant to be, a gathering place where quinceañera plans were made over coffee, where new mothers brought their babies to be blessed by the community, where elderly neighbors came not just for pastries but for conversation and connection. Once a month, David made the drive from Denver to Phoenix, ostensibly for business meetings but really to visit Eliza's kitchen. He had arrived during busy periods when Amy was too focused on customers to pay close attention to any individual face, order different items each time, and treasure their brief interactions. Amy didn't recognize him from their single encounter at the coffee shop in her bustling kitchen. Wearing her grandmother's apron and radiant with purpose, she looked completely different from the tired barista who had served him that day in Denver. But David recognized her joy, the way her face lit up when customers complimented her pastries, the pride in her voice when she explained the history behind each recipe. "This tres leches cake is exactly like my grandmother used to make," he told her during one visit. Amy beamed. Eliza always said the secret was in the timing, when to stop mixing, when to add the milk, when to let love do the work instead of forcing it. David found himself storing these conversations like treasures, carrying Amy's words back to Denver where they brightened his corporate world with their authenticity and warmth. Their text conversations continued, Amy sharing her amazement at the bakery's success and her gratitude toward the mysterious benefactor who had made it possible. "There's this customer who comes from out of town just for my tres leches cake," Amy texted one evening. "When he smiles, it feels like coming home. Is it crazy that someone I barely know can make me feel so safe?" David stared at the message, his heart racing as he typed his response. "I'm falling for someone who doesn't even know my real name. Is it possible to love someone you've never truly met?" Amy never realized they were describing the same person, the same growing attraction, the same impossible situation that was about to become beautifully complicated. David's monthly visits to Eliza's kitchen had become the highlight of his otherwise mechanical existence. This particular Tuesday afternoon, he had driven down from Denver with a specific purpose. He had finally decided to tell Amy the truth about who he was and what he had done. The weight of his deception had become unbearable, especially as their anonymous text conversations grew more intimate and their brief bakery encounters more meaningful. Amy was wiping down tables when David arrived, the lunch rush having just ended. She looked up with that radiant smile that had become as familiar to him as his own reflection, and David felt his carefully rehearsed confession die in his throat. "The usual tres leches cake?" Amy asked, moving toward the display case. David opened his mouth to say the words he had practiced during the entire drive from Denver. "Amy, I need to tell you something important about who I really am." Instead, what came out was actually, "Could I get a coffee with that today, and maybe one of those empanadas?" "Of course. Find a seat and I'll bring everything over." David chose his usual table by the window, pulling out his laptop to answer emails while he waited. But instead of opening his business correspondence, his fingers automatically navigated to the messaging app where months of conversations with Amy lived. He stared at her name at the top of the screen, his cursor hovering over the compose button. "Just tell her," he thought. "Walk back to the counter and explain everything. She deserves to know the truth." But every time David looked up at Amy, humming softly as she prepared his order, he lost his nerve. How do you tell someone that every conversation you've shared has been built on a fundamental lie? How do you explain that you've been living a double life without sounding like a stalker or a manipulator? The internal battle raged in David's mind as he watched Amy move through her domain with such confidence and joy. She belonged here, in this restored bakery, surrounded by her grandmother's legacy. She was thriving in ways that had nothing to do with his intervention and everything to do with her own talent and determination. Maybe it would be kinder to let her live in ignorance, to preserve the happiness he had helped create rather than destroying it with the truth. "I'll be right back with your order," Amy called out, disappearing into the kitchen. David's phone buzzed with a text message, and without thinking, he opened the messaging app on his laptop to respond. Amy's name dominated the screen, their conversation history stretching back months. His finger traced over her most recent message from the night before. "I think I'm falling for someone, but I'm scared to trust my heart again. How do you know when it's safe to love someone?" His response had been equally vulnerable. "I think you never really know. You just have to decide if the possibility of love is worth the risk of heartbreak." David stared at their exchange, realizing with crystal clarity that he was about to create exactly the heartbreak they had both written about. But before he could close the laptop, his body betrayed him with an urgent need for the restroom. "Amy, I'll be right back," he called toward the kitchen. leaving his laptop open on the table as he hurried to the back of the bakery. Amy emerged from the kitchen moments later, carrying David's tres leches cake, empanada, and coffee on a tray. She approached his table with a smile, but stopped short when she saw the laptop screen. There, displayed in large letters at the top of the messaging interface, was her own name, Amy Grayson. Confusion washed over her. Why would this customer have her name on his computer? Maybe it was a different Amy Grayson. It wasn't an uncommon name. But curiosity got the better of her judgment, and she found herself leaning closer to the screen. The conversation thread was extensive, months of back-and-forth messages. Amy's eyes caught fragments of text that made her blood run cold. Tomorrow I lose the last piece of my grandmother. How do you say goodbye to your entire identity? Eliza used to say that tears are just love with nowhere to go. Her own words, her most private, vulnerable confessions to her anonymous confidant. But they were displayed here, on the laptop of a customer who came to her bakery monthly, who bought her tres leches cake and complimented her empanadas and made her feel safe with his kind eyes. Amy stood frozen, reading months of her most private thoughts displayed on screen. When David appeared in the doorway, her world collapsed again. "How long have you been playing this game with my life?" she whispered, tears streaming down her face. David's face went white as he saw Amy standing over his laptop, her expression a mixture of betrayal, shock, and devastating hurt. "Amy, I can explain." "Explain what?" Amy's voice rose, drawing the attention of the few remaining customers. "Explain how you've been reading my soul like some kind of book while pretending to be a stranger. Explain how every conversation we've had in this bakery has been you acting like you don't know the most broken parts of my heart." David moved toward her, but Amy stepped back, her hands shaking as she pointed at the screen. "That first night, when I texted about losing everything, about saying goodbye to my grandmother's legacy, you knew it was me, and you just played along. It started as an accident, Amy. Your text was probably meant for a crisis line, but it landed on mine. I was going to tell you immediately, but your message was so raw, so honest, and I was struggling too. I had just lost my father, and I was drowning in loneliness. So you decided to use my pain as your therapy." Amy's voice cracked with the weight of betrayal. "You read my trauma like it was your personal entertainment, and then you felt sorry for me. Decided to play hero." David closed the laptop, his hands trembling. "I fell in love with you, Amy. Through those conversations, I fell in love with your strength, your resilience, your capacity to find beauty even in the darkest moments. You fell in love with my vulnerability." Amy shot back. "You read my soul like a book and then pretended to be a stranger. You bought my dreams and then acted like they were coincidences. How can I trust anything that's happened?" Amy gestured around the restored bakery, her voice breaking. "This place, this beautiful restoration, my new life, none of it's real, is it? It's all just some rich man's guilt project. You felt sorry for the broken girl and decided to play God with her life. That's not true. You earned every bit of this success. I just gave you back what was stolen from you. Without my knowledge, without my consent, you made decisions about my entire future while pretending to be my friend in the dark. How is that different from what the banks did? They controlled my fate from boardrooms I never saw, and you controlled it from behind a screen I never knew existed." Amy walked behind the counter and pulled out the business documents for Eliza's kitchen. "Take it all back. The bakery, the equipment, everything. I won't be your charity case anymore. Amy, this is your grandmother's legacy. It belongs with you. Nothing belongs with me if it comes with strings attached to lies," Amy said firmly, her voice steady despite her tears. "I'd rather start over with nothing than live in a dream someone else built for me without my permission." David realized with crushing clarity that he had become exactly what he had always despised, someone who made decisions for others for their own good without including them in the process. He had replicated his father's controlling behavior, believing that good intentions justified deceptive methods. "I'll transfer everything to you legally, with no conditions," David said quietly. "The bakery is yours regardless of what happens between us." "There is no us, David. There never was. There was just you pulling strings while I danced, thinking I was making my own choices." Amy moved toward the door, opening it wide. The message was clear. David gathered his laptop, walking past her without another word. As he reached the sidewalk, he heard her voice one final time. I trusted you with everything I had left, both versions of you." After David left, Amy locked the door and turned the sign to closed. She sank into the chair where Eliza used to sit during quiet afternoons and cried. Not just for the betrayal but for the loss of the most honest relationship she had ever experienced. Even though it had been built on the most fundamental lie. Is Amy right to feel betrayed, or should she forgive David's deception? Share your opinion below. 3 days after the devastating confrontation at Eliza's kitchen, Amy received a thick manila envelope delivered by a courier in an expensive suit. Inside were legal documents that made her hands shake as she read them. Complete ownership transfer of Eliza's kitchen, the building, all equipment, and a trust fund containing enough money to maintain and expand the business for decades. The lawyer's letter was formal and precise. "Mr. David Holman has instructed our firm to transfer all assets related to the Eliza's Kitchen restoration project to Miss Amy Grayson, with no conditions, restrictions, or future claims. This transfer is final and irrevocable." But it was the handwritten note tucked between the legal papers that broke Amy's heart all over again. "Your grandmother's legacy belongs with you. Love doesn't own it. Liberate. I'm sorry for everything I did wrong, but I will never regret that it led me to know the most extraordinary person I've ever met. Build something beautiful here. You were always capable of miracles. I just had the privilege of witnessing them." Amy stared at the documents spread across Eliza's old kitchen table, feeling a complex mixture of relief, gratitude, and profound loss. David had given her everything she had ever wanted: her family's bakery, financial security, complete independence, and then walked away without asking for anything in return. It was the most generous and the most heartbreaking gesture anyone had ever made for her. The months that followed were a whirlwind of growth and introspection. Eliza's Kitchen continued to thrive under Amy's leadership, becoming not just a neighborhood bakery but a cultural landmark that drew visitors from across the Southwest. Amy hired 6 more employees, started a catering business, and began teaching weekend baking classes to preserve traditional Mexican pastry techniques. But success couldn't fill the void that David's absence had created. Amy found herself missing not just their anonymous text conversations, but the man who had visited her bakery monthly with kind eyes and genuine appreciation for her work. She missed the way he listened when she talked about Eliza's recipes, the way he smiled when he tasted her tres leches cake, the way he made her feel seen and valued without knowing her history. As the initial shock and anger faded, Amy began to examine David's actions with clearer eyes. Yes, he had deceived her about his identity. Yes, he had made decisions about her life without her consent. But his motivations had never been selfish or manipulative. He had genuinely wanted to help her reclaim her grandmother's legacy, and when the truth came out, he had immediately stepped aside and given her complete control. Amy started to understand that David's deception had come from love, not malice. He had been as trapped by the circumstances as she was, unable to reveal his identity without destroying the honest connection they had built, unable to help her without seeming patronizing or controlling. He had made impossible choices in an impossible situation, and while his methods were flawed, his heart had always been in the right place. The turning point came on a quiet Tuesday evening, exactly 6 months after their confrontation. Amy was alone in the kitchen, making Eliza's tres leches cake for a customer's birthday celebration the next day. As she whisked the 3 milks together, evaporated, condensed, and heavy cream, she heard Eliza's voice in her memory. "Mija, the best recipes require patience, time, and forgiveness. Sometimes the most beautiful things come from the most broken beginnings." Amy realized she had been so focused on David's deception that she had ignored the deeper truth. He had seen her pain and chosen to help, even when helping meant risking his own heart. He had fallen in love with her strength and resilience, not her vulnerability. And when she had demanded he leave, he had respected her choice completely, giving her everything and asking for nothing. That night, Amy sat in Eliza's kitchen with her phone in her hands, composing and deleting messages for hours. Finally, she found the courage to type what her heart had been trying to tell her for months. "David, I spent 6 months being angry and 6 months missing you. Tonight, I made Eliza's tres leches cake, and I finally understood something. Love isn't about perfect timing or perfect honesty. It's about seeing someone's heart even when they're scared to show it completely. You saw mine in those dark texts, and I saw yours in every kindness you showed me, even when I didn't know who you were. Would you like to come home for dinner?" Amy hit send before she could lose her nerve, then sat staring at her phone, wondering if David would even respond after all this time. The reply came within minutes, "I'll be on the first flight to Phoenix." David arrived at Eliza's kitchen the next evening as Amy was closing up. She saw him through the window, standing on the sidewalk where he had stood so many times before, but this time his shoulders carried the weight of uncertainty rather than confident purpose. Amy opened the door and stepped outside, flowers still dusting her apron, her hair escaping from its ponytail after a long day of baking. They stood looking at each other for a long moment, 6 months of separation and longing stretching between them. "I have something to tell you," Amy said softly, her voice carrying across the evening air. "I love you too, both versions of you, the anonymous friend who listened to my pain and the customer who made me feel beautiful, and I'm ready to start our story the right way this time." David's eyes filled with tears as he stepped closer. "Amy, I want you to know that everything I felt for you was real. Every conversation, every moment of connection, none of that was lies." "I know," Amy replied, reaching for his hands. "That's what took me so long to understand. The feelings were real, even when the circumstances were complicated." 1 year later, Eliza's kitchen hosted its first wedding reception, Amy and David's own. The ceremony took place in the bakery's main room, with Amy walking down an aisle lined with tables displaying her grandmother's most treasured recipes. The entire neighborhood came to celebrate, along with customers who had become family and employees who had become siblings. David's vows brought tears to every eye. "Amy, you taught me that wrong numbers can lead to right people, that broken dreams can be rebuilt stronger, and that love means helping someone fly, not clipping their wings. You showed me that the most beautiful connections happen when we're brave enough to be vulnerable with strangers, and the most lasting love grows when we're courageous enough to forgive each other's imperfections." Amy's response was simple but profound. "David, Eliza always said the best recipes require patience, the finest ingredients, and a lot of love." I think she was talking about more than food. Our love story required patience while we found our way to the truth, the finest ingredients of honesty and forgiveness, and enough love to overcome fear. Today, I'm not just marrying you. I'm choosing to trust in the recipe we're creating together. As they cut their wedding cake, a perfect recreation of Eliza's signature tres leches, Amy whispered, "Thank you for giving me back my dreams and then letting me choose to share them with you." Their love story became proof that sometimes the most beautiful things begin with mistakes, grow through truth, and flourish when we're brave enough to trust again. My dear Dr. Tom's family, this is one of the many stories I have in store for you, and I'm genuinely curious if it touched your hearts. If it did, please let me know in the comment below and subscribe, because this is just the beginning. Tomorrow we'll gather again to feel this same warmth in another Dr. Tom's story, and I really do not want you to miss it. Tonight, as you go to sleep, remember that your next great love story might be just one text message away, and sometimes that wrong number or unexpected moment might be exactly what leads you to the right person.